Transforming Suffering into the Wisdom of Enlightenment. Introduction 1. Of the most profound insights of Buddhism is the recognition that suffering, dukkha, is not merely a condition to be escaped or suppressed, but a potential source of wisdom and transformation. The Buddha's own journey to enlightenment began with his confrontation with the realities of aging, sickness, and death, the inescapable suffering inherent in existence. Rather than avoiding suffering, he turned toward it with penetrating insight, discovering that it can be transformed into the wisdom that leads to liberation. This essay explores the Buddhist understanding of suffering, the methods by which it can be transformed, and the ways in which the wisdom born of suffering becomes the very foundation of enlightenment. Drawing from the early teachings of the Theravada tradition, the expansive vision of the Mahayana, and the esoteric practices of Vajrayana, we will see how suffering, instead of being an obstacle, becomes the very fuel for awakening. 1. The centrality of suffering in Buddhism. The first noble truth. The Buddha began his teaching with the first noble truth. Life is pervaded by dukkha. This truth acknowledges that human existence involves pain, dissatisfaction, loss, and impermanence. Birth, aging, illness, death, separation from loved ones, unfulfilled desires. These reveal the pervasive nature of suffering, not a pessimistic view. This recognition is often misunderstood as pessimism, but in Buddhism it is considered a realistic and compassionate acknowledgement of life as it is. Only by facing suffering directly can we begin to understand its causes and find freedom. Suffering as a teacher. In many traditions, suffering is viewed as a curse or punishment. Buddhism reframes it as a teacher on opportunity for deep insight into impermanence, anicca, non-self, anat, and the nature of attachment. Suffering is the gateway to the spiritual path. 2. Understanding the causes of suffering. Second noble truth. Craving and ignorance. The second noble truth identifies the causes of suffering as craving, tan, and ignorance. Avijji, we cling to what is impermanent, resist what is inevitable, and misunderstand the nature of reality. The role of ignorance is not merely lack of knowledge, but a fundamental misperception of reality. We see permanence where there is impermanence, self where there is no self, satisfaction where there is only fleeting experience. This distortion generates craving, leading to suffering. 3. The path of transformation. The third noble truth, cessation. Third noble truth offers hope. Suffering can cease. The cessation of dukkha is nibbana, nirvana, the state of liberation. The fourth noble truth. The path. The Buddha prescribes the Eightfold Path as the method of transforming suffering into liberation. Right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration work together to dismantle ignorance and craving for suffering as a catalyst for compassion. In Mahayana Buddhism, suffering is not only personal but universal. Realizing that all beings suffer awakens compassion, karuñā. The Bodhisattva vows to use their own suffering as a bridge to connect with others, vowing not to enter final nirvana until all beings are liberated. Thus, suffering is transformed into empathy, breaking down the illusion of separateness and fostering the interdependent vision of life. 5. Transformative practice as a mindfulness of suffering. Through mindfulness sati, practitioners observe suffering without aversion or clinging. By facing pain directly, they penetrate its impermanent and non-self nature. Be meditation on impermanence, contemplating death, maranyanusati, decay and loss, trains the mind to let go of attachments and appreciate the fleeting beauty of life. C. Tonglen practice, Vajrayana in Tibetan Buddhism. Tonglen meditation involves breathing in the suffering of others and breathing out compassion and healing. This radical practice transforms personal pain into a vehicle of altruism. D. Loving kindness. Meti Bhavon, cultivating unconditional love and goodwill, dissolves resentment and hatred, transforming the wounds of suffering into the balm of kindness. 6. From suffering to wisdom, the wisdom of impermanence by observing suffering. Practitioners realize that all phenomena are impermanent. This wisdom undermines craving and loosens attachment. The wisdom of non-self-suffering reveals the illusion of an independent, permanent self. We suffer because we cling to the idea of me and mine. Insight into non-self dissolves this. Root delusion, the wisdom of emptiness. Niyat, in Mahayana philosophy, suffering points toward the emptiness of inherent existence. When we see that phenomena are empty of fixed essence, we are freed from grasping and aversion. 7. Suffering. In the Bodhisattva, Patha Bodhisattva, ideal epitomizes the transformation of suffering into wisdom and compassion. A bodhisattva does not avoid suffering, but embraces it as part of the shared human condition. By practicing generosity, patience, and compassion, suffering is alchemized into boundless wisdom that benefits all beings. The 6 promits, perfections, generosity, discipline, patience, energy, meditation, and wisdom, often cultivated precisely in the midst of suffering. For instance, patience, Kjainti, is impossible without hardship. Thus suffering becomes indispensable to spiritual growth. 8. Vajrayana, transforming poison into medicine. In Vajrayana Buddhism, the passions that cause suffering are not suppressed but transmuted into wisdom. Anger becomes mirror-like wisdom. Desire becomes discriminating wisdom. Ignorance becomes the wisdom of reality itself. Here suffering is not merely endured but used as raw energy for awakening. Through visualization, mantra, and tantric practices, obstacles are turned into the very path of enlightenment. 9. Every day. Life as a field of transformation, Buddhism does not confine suffering to meditation halls. Daily struggles, illness, loss, conflict, stress are fertile ground for insight. When approached with mindfulness, each difficulty becomes an opportunity to deepen wisdom and compassion. For example, a parent facing the suffering of a sick child learns profound compassion. A business person enduring failure realizes the impermanence of success and failure alike. A person struggling with loneliness can awaken to the interconnectedness of all beings. 10. Stories of transformation. The Bodhisattva, Gautama himself, began his journey with the 4 sights: old age, sickness, death, and a wandering ascetic. Confronting suffering ignited his quest for liberation. Milarepath, Tibetan yogi Milarepa, endured immense suffering from his own misdeeds, but transformed it into deep realization through solitary meditation. Contemporary practitioners, modern teachers, such as Thich Net Hanh, emphasize suffering as compost that nourishes the flower of happiness. Without suffering, there can be no true compassion or joy. 11. Beyond avoidance. Embracing the paradox, the transformative approach of Buddhism contrasts sharply with modern culture's tendency to avoid or anesthetize suffering. Through distraction, consumerism, and denial, people try to escape pain. Buddhism, however, insists that only by embracing suffering directly can we unlock its hidden wisdom. This paradox that suffering is both the obstacle and the gateway at the heart of the path. 12. The fruit of transformation, liberation ultimately. Transforming suffering into wisdom culminates in liberation. The enlightened one does not live in a world without pain, but relates to pain without attachment, aversion, or ignorance. Physical pain may remain, but mental anguish is dissolved. Compassion flows naturally because suffering is understood universally. Joy arises not from external conditions, but from inner freedom. Conclusion: in Buddhism, suffering is not the enemy, but the teacher. It is the raw material from which wisdom and compassion are forged. By recognizing suffering, understanding its causes, and practicing the path, one transforms dukkha into the very wisdom that leads to enlightenment. Theravada emphasizes personal liberation through direct insight into suffering. Mahayana expands this vision to universal compassion, where suffering becomes the ground of the bodhisattva path. Vajrayana turns suffering into energy for realization. Across traditions, the message is consistent. Suffering is the very doorway to awakening. Thus, the Buddhist path does not promise a life free from suffering, but a radical transformation of our relationship to it. Suffering, once understood and embraced, becomes the womb of wisdom, the seed of compassion, and the very ground of enlightenment.